Cape buffalo kill more hunters, rangers, and researchers in Africa than lions, leopards, and crocodiles combined. They are herbivores. That single fact tells you everything you need to know about them. They don't kill because they're cornered. They don't kill out of hunger or fear. They kill because they remember. Research from the University of Pretoria found that buffalo herds maintain specific threat memory for individual predators, recognizing lion faces, tracking territorial movements, and coordinating responses that researchers now formally classify as advanced prey intelligence behavior. Not instinct, not reflex, behavior with structure, with purpose, with something that looks uncomfortably like intent. The Cape Buffalo Alliance is the term researchers use when a herd shifts from defensive into coordinated offensive behavior. It is rare. When it happens, the lions always lose. Every documented alliance event in the research record ends with predators retreating, without a single exception. This footage follows Herd 7 in Kruger National Park over 3 days of confrontation with the Ntsevu Pride, 14 lions who had hunted this herd for 6 consecutive years. On day 1, the buffalo ran. On day 2, they watched. On day 3, they stopped running. They turned around, they formed up, and they had a plan. That day 3 footage is now required viewing in wildlife behavior courses at 2 South African universities. You are about to see why. And if you want to see what comes next, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. We start at day 1, morning. The light arrives slowly in Kruger. It doesn't flood in the way it does elsewhere. It seeps, orange and low, threading through the mopane trees and spreading across the floodplain like something cautious, like something that knows what lives here and doesn't want to disturb it. By 5:47 a.m., the temperature is already climbing toward 28 degrees Celsius. By noon, it will touch 41. The animals that need to move will move early. The ones that need to hunt will move earlier still. The Ntsevu Pride was already awake. 14 lions, 2 coalition males, both in their prime, one carrying a scar across his left shoulder that researchers had been photographing and cataloguing since 2018. 12 females and sub-adults arranged in a social hierarchy that had taken years to calcify into its current form. The Pride operated this corridor of southern Kruger with a precision that wildlife researchers described in published notes as territorial optimization. They didn't just hunt here, they managed here. They knew which waterholes drew which herds and when. They knew the seasonal migration patterns of the impala populations that moved through the drainage lines to the east. And they knew Herd 7. 6 years of hunting the same buffalo herd will do that. The relationship between the Ntsevu Pride and Herd 7 was not random predator-prey contact. It was what ecologists call a persistent predator-prey pairing, a documented, recurring interaction between specific individuals within both groups across multiple seasons and years. The lions knew the herd's grazing routes. They knew which members were slower, which calves were newest, which older bulls tended to drift wide of the main body when feeding. And Herd 7, as researchers were beginning to understand, knew the lions back. Not many people talk about what Cape buffalo actually are before they talk about what Cape buffalo do. That's a mistake, because the doing makes no sense without the being. An adult Cape buffalo, Sincerus caffer, stands roughly 1.5 meters at the shoulder and weighs between 500 and 900 kilograms, depending on sex, age, and condition. The males are broader, darker, and carry the horn structure that makes them visually unmistakable, a heavy boss of fused keratin across the forehead from which the horns sweep outward and then curve sharply upward. The boss itself is dense enough that a single rifle round, the kind used by professional hunters, sometimes fails to penetrate it cleanly. Rangers who work in buffalo territory are trained to treat any wounded buffalo as an immediate lethal threat, because a buffalo that goes down and gets up again is a buffalo that will circle back and find you. They live in herds because the herd is the weapon. A solitary buffalo is a large, dangerous animal. A herd of 60 buffalo is something categorically different. A collective organism with distributed sensing, distributed memory, and the capacity to generate coordinated responses to threat that exceed what any individual member could produce alone. The science on this has been building quietly for 2 decades, mostly in the journals that wildlife documentaries don't read. But it was the University of Pretoria's long-term behavioral studies in Kruger, running from 2009 to the present, that began to formalize what field researchers had been observing for years. Buffalo herds don't just respond to predators, they track them. The threat memory research is worth understanding because it reframes everything that happens over the next 3 days. Using photographic identification of individual buffalo, combined with GPS collar data on lions from 3 Kruger prides, including the Ntsevu, researchers documented that buffalo herds altered their movement patterns in response to specific lion individuals, not just lions as a category. When the scarred Ntsevu male moved into a given sector, herd 7's feeding range contracted and shifted within 24 to 48 hours. When both coalition males were tracked to positions east of the Swiswela waterhole, the herd's nighttime clustering behavior changed. Tighter formation, more bulls on the outer ring, fewer calves allowed to drift to feeding distance from the main body. The herd wasn't reacting to the smell of lion, it was reacting to the spatial behavior of known individuals. This is the animal the Ntsevu Pride had been hunting for 6 years. They had learned it. It had learned them back. And on the morning of day 1, those 6 years were about to produce something neither side had entirely anticipated. The lions made first contact at 6:14 a.m. Herd 7 was spread across a section of open grassland northwest of the Swiswela drainage, approximately 80 to 90 individuals feeding in a loose formation. The calves born that season, researchers counted 7, stayed close to their mothers, moving when the cows moved, stopping when the cows stopped. The oldest bulls occupied the periphery the way they always did, heads down but not inattentive, the great horns sweeping close to the grass with every step. The Ntsevu females came in from the northeast, using the scrub acacia line as cover. Standard approach formation, 2 flanking units moving wide while a center group held position, waiting for the outer pair to establish angle. Field researchers who reviewed the footage later described it as a textbook example of coordinated feline hunting behavior. The kind of hunt the Ntsevu had run hundreds of times. The kind of hunt that historically ended the same way. The herd detected the movement at 6:19 a.m. What happened next lasted less than 4 minutes. The outer lions accelerated, driving hard into the right flank of the herd. The mass of buffalo broke left, the way large prey herds almost always break, away from direct threat toward the perceived safety of numbers compressing together. In the chaos of that break, a juvenile bull, estimated at 2 years old, perhaps 250 kilograms, got caught on the wrong side of the movement. A gap opened between him and the main body. The center group of lionesses was already moving. The kill was swift. Suffocation gripped to the throat, 2 females holding the hindquarters. The young bull went down in under 90 seconds. The herd ran, the dust settled, the lions fed. And then something happened that almost didn't get recorded. On the footage, in the far left of the frame, one animal wasn't running. An older bull, heavy-bossed, moving with the slight stiffness in his right foreleg that had been documented in researcher field notes as far back as 2021, had stopped approximately 200 meters from the kill site. He stood perfectly still, head raised, eyes on the lions. He stayed that way for 41 seconds. Then he turned and walked back into the herd. 41 seconds is a long time to stand still while 14 lions are feeding 200 meters away. The researcher who flagged this clip in the post-analysis wrote a single note beside the timestamp: "Observe." At the time, nobody was sure what to make of it. By day 3, they would be. What the cameras don't show, what they can never quite show, is what happens inside a herd in the hour after a kill. The behavioral literature describes it carefully because it matters. Buffalo herds do not simply resume grazing after a predation event. There is a documented post-kill behavioral sequence that involves specific vocalizations, physical clustering around the matriarch, and what researchers describe as social arousal consolidation, a period in which the herd's collective stress response doesn't dissipate, but instead gets redistributed and encoded. The individuals who witnessed the kill most directly cluster together. The bulls who were on the outer ring when the breach happened move through the herd in patterns that field researchers have mapped as systematic rather than random. The matriarch of herd 7 was a cow estimated at 17 to 19 years old, large for the species, carrying a notch in her left ear that made her individually identifiable across 9 years of research photographs. She was not the largest animal in the herd, she was not the most physically imposing, but the movement patterns of the herd in the minutes and hours after the kill organized around her position the way iron filings organize around a magnet. Animals moved toward her. When she moved, the herd moved. When she stopped, it stopped. She had been through this before. 6 years of Ntsevu predation meant she had been through this many times. And something in what the researchers were measuring, the duration of the post-kill clustering, the specific vocalizations exchanged between the matriarch and the older peripheral bulls, the way the herd's movement in the afternoon differed from its standard grazing pattern, suggested that this time the encoding was different. The first medium loop opened here, though nobody watching in real time could have named it. Something in the herd's response to this kill was not quite standard. The data would take another 36 hours to explain why. The Ntsevu Pride made its second attempt at 4:40 p.m. This was the detail that caught researchers' attention most sharply in retrospect. 2 kills from the same herd within a single day is not standard lion behavior. Prey herds in a stressed post-kill state are more alert, more tightly clustered, more likely to mob respond to a second approach. The energetic cost-to-benefit ratio of a same-day second hunt against the same herd is, under normal conditions, unfavorable. The Ntsevu attempted it anyway. The reason, researchers believe, was the drought cycle. Rainfall in this corridor of Kruger had been 22% below the 10-year average for the preceding 8 months. The prey density that normally buffered the Ntsevu's hunting range had compressed. Alternative targets were fewer. The Pride, with 14 mouths to feed, was operating under resource pressure that pushed their behavior outside its normal parameters. They came in from the south this time. Different angle, different flanking geometry. The herd was tighter now. The post-kill clustering that had been documented in the afternoon data was still active, and the buffalo didn't have the loose, scattered formation that had allowed the morning separation to happen. The Ntsevu ran the approach to within 60 meters before the herd responded. They did not break apart. The outer bulls turned to face. The cows with calves compressed inward. The matriarch moved to a specific position, not away from the lions, but to the forward edge of the left flank. The bulls on the right side of the formation began moving laterally, not in retreat, but in a sweeping arc that, had it continued, would have started to envelop the approaching lion's right side. The Ntsevu pulled back. They didn't complete the charge. No kill, no injury on either side. But the buffalo, in pulling the defensive formation rather than scattering, had done something that field researchers flagged immediately in the evening review session. They hadn't just defended. In the final seconds of the approach, 2 of the peripheral bulls had moved toward the retreating lions rather than holding position. 4 meters, maybe 5, but toward. The researcher's note for 4:58 p.m. read, They're tracking where the lions go. The Ntsevu settled into cover, approximately 800 meters to the southwest. The herd knew exactly which direction they'd gone. As the light dropped and the temperature finally began to ease, Herd 7 did not spread out to graze the way they would on a normal evening. They clustered. They stayed tight. Day 1 score: Lions 1, Buffalo 0. But the nature of that 0 had already changed. Day 2 was coming, and the buffalo were paying attention. The buffalo moved before sunrise, not away, toward. At 5:22 a.m. on day 2, while the sky was still the color of cold ash and the Ntsevu Pride's GPS collars placed all 14 lions in a resting cluster approximately 800 meters southwest of the previous evening's standoff position, a subgroup of 7 bulls from Herd 7 began moving in a direction that had no grazing logic behind it. There was no water source to the southwest, no known salt lick, no terrain feature that would draw buffalo in that direction under normal conditions. They were moving toward the last known position of the lions that had killed one of their herd the morning before. They stopped at 340 meters, stood, tested the air, listened, then held that position for 19 minutes before returning to the main herd. Field researcher Adri Smith, reviewing the footage at the Kruger research station that evening, described what she saw in terms that were careful and precise, in the way that scientists are careful and precise when they know they're looking at something their field is not yet fully equipped to explain. She did not use the word scouting. She used the phrase sentinel behavior in offensive context, a distinction that matters because sentinel behavior in prey animals is well documented and well understood. Sentinel behavior directed toward a predator's resting position before that predator has made any new approach is something different. It implies a directional awareness that goes beyond reactive threat response. It implies that the herd knew where the lions were and chose to go look. The Ntsevu's collars confirmed the lions hadn't moved all night. Herd 7 knew that corridor. They had grazed it for years. And yet 7 bulls walked to within 340 meters of sleeping lions at 5:22 in the morning and stood there for 19 minutes. What were they doing? The honest answer is that the research is still working toward a complete explanation, but the behavioral data from that morning, combined with everything that followed over the next 18 hours, has produced a framework that is now taught in 2 South African university wildlife programs as a case study in what happens when prey intelligence meets sustained predation pressure. It is worth understanding that framework, because without it, day 3 looks like chaos. With it, day 3 looks like a decision. The University of Pretoria's long-term study on Cape Buffalo threat cognition began in 2009 as a relatively modest data collection effort attached to a broader Kruger ecosystem health project. Researchers were primarily interested in how buffalo movement patterns responded to lion presence. Standard spatial ecology work, the kind that produces useful conservation data about corridor management and prey distribution. What they found over the following decade pushed the study in a direction that nobody had initially anticipated. The key discovery was not that buffalo responded to lions. Every prey animal responds to predators. The key discovery was the specificity of the response. When researchers began cross-referencing individual lion identification photographs with individual buffalo behavioral records, a painstaking process that required years of accumulated field data, a pattern emerged that the team initially treated with considerable skepticism. Buffalo herds altered their behavior not just in response to lions as a category, but in response to specific lions as individuals. The response to the Ntsevu coalition males was measurably different from the response to younger, less established lions that occasionally passed through the same corridor. The herd's post-kill clustering behavior was more pronounced and longer-lasting after kills made by experienced hunters than after kills made by sub-adults. The directional movement adjustments that the herd made in the 24 hours following a kill correlated specifically with the tracked movements of the individual lions responsible, not with lion presence in the area generally. This was not instinct operating on a general template. This was something that required individual recognition, sustained memory across time, and the capacity to build what researchers cautiously termed a threat model, an internal representation of a specific predator's behavior patterns, location tendencies, and hunting methods. It took the team 4 years to publish because the implications were significant enough that they wanted the data to be unimpeachable before they put it in front of the field. The paper, when it came out, produced the kind of quiet, rippling reaction in wildlife biology circles that doesn't make headlines, but changes the way researchers frame their questions for the next decade. It didn't say buffalo were intelligent in the way humans are intelligent. It said that the boundary between instinct and cognition in large social prey mammals was more porous than the field had assumed, and that in species under sustained, long-term predation pressure from identified individuals, something that functionally resembled tactical thinking could emerge from the collective behavior of the group. Herd 7 had been under sustained, long-term predation pressure from identified individuals for 6 years. The 7 bulls, who walked to 340 meters southwest at 5:22 a.m. on day 2, were not acting on a random behavioral impulse. They were doing something the research framework predicts would happen when a herd crosses the threshold into a lion's precursor state, actively locating the known threat before the threat locates them. By mid-morning, both groups were at the Swaizuela waterhole. This was not unusual. During drought conditions, waterhole convergence between predator and prey is common and is generally managed through a loose temporal hierarchy. Large prey first, then predators, then smaller species in the margins. What was unusual was the duration of the overlap and the spatial geometry of how both groups positioned themselves once they arrived. The Ntsevu Pride reached the waterhole at 9:15 a.m. They drank quickly, the way lions drink when they're aware of prey presence nearby, heads down briefly, then up, scanning. The 2 coalition males moved to the eastern edge of the waterhole's bank and settled into a loose, watchful posture. The females spread along the northern margin. Herd 7 arrived at 9:34 a.m. They did not stop at the waterhole's edge the way a herd will when it detects predators and begins its assessment process. That particular hesitation pattern, the collective slowdown and scent testing, was absent. They walked to the western edge with a directness that researchers, reviewing the footage later, found striking. And then they did something that produced a long silence in the research station review room when it came up on the screen. The matriarch positioned herself at the forward apex of the herd's formation, not behind the bulls, where a matriarch in defensive posture would typically be located, but in front of the left flank, facing across the open water toward the Ntsevu coalition males on the eastern bank. The older bulls arranged themselves not in the standard defensive arc, but in a line that ran parallel to the waterhole's edge, perpendicular to the lions, facing them directly. 40 meters of water and mud separated the 2 groups. For 37 minutes, neither side moved. The lions didn't charge. The buffalo didn't run. The calves drank. The coalition males watched the matriarch. The matriarch watched the coalition males. And in the behavioral data being silently collected by the GPS collars and the research cameras mounted in the surrounding trees, something was being documented that researchers would spend months analyzing. The spatial arrangement of herd 7 at that waterhole was not a defensive formation. It was a display formation. It was the herd showing the lions, in the only language available to them, that they knew exactly where the lions were and had chosen to come here anyway. At 10:11 a.m., the Ntsevu Pride left the waterhole. The herd drank. The trigger came at 4:17 p.m. In retrospect, and retrospect is always in some sense conducted in retrospect, the timing was almost inevitable. The Ntsevu Pride had been operating under resource pressure for months. One kill in the previous 24 hours had fed 14 lions for less than a day at the caloric intake their body weights required. The waterhole standoff had cost them an energy expenditure they couldn't easily recover. And Herd 7 was, by the standards of available prey in this drought-stricken corridor, the most accessible large prey concentration within the Pride's hunting range. They came in from the northwest this time, a different approach vector than either of the Day 1 attempts. The Ntsevu were adapting their geometry in response to the herd's demonstrated ability to hold formation on the southern and eastern approaches. The northwest approach used a dry riverbed as a concealment channel for the initial movement, bringing the flanking females to within 80 meters before the herd's outer sentinels picked up the movement. The breach lasted 40 seconds. A young female calf, separated from her mother in the initial panic movement of the herd's left flank, was taken at 4:19 p.m. This was the second kill in 36 hours. In the research record, this is the documented trigger point for alliance activation. Not the first kill, not the second kill alone, the interval. 2 kills within 36 hours from the same herd by the same predators crosses what researchers describe as a cumulative threat threshold, a point at which the herd's collective threat memory system shifts from reactive management mode into what the University of Pretoria team formally classified as coordinated offensive preparation. The distinction matters. Reactive management means the herd adjusts its behavior to reduce future predation risk. Coordinated offensive preparation means the herd begins organizing to neutralize the threat directly. Medium Loop 1 opened on Day 1 when the herd's post-kill response first looked different from standard. This was the explanation. The first kill had primed the system. The second kill activated it. The matriarch's behavior in the 90 minutes following the second kill was documented in granular detail by the research cameras. She moved through the herd in a pattern that researchers describe as social integration contact. Brief physical touches, specific vocalizations, a sequence of interactions with the older bulls that involved sustained face-to-face engagement rather than the passing contact of normal herd movement. The older bulls, one by one, moved to positions on the outer edge of the herd and held them. The formation that had been loose and grazing-oriented all afternoon became, over the course of those 90 minutes, something structured and intentional. The herd was organizing. Night fell differently over the Swiswela corridor on Day 2. After dark, Kruger belongs to different rules. The sounds change, the low-frequency contact calls of elephant families moving through the drainage lines, the hyena vocalizations carrying across kilometers of open grassland, the absolute silence that falls in the seconds before a lion vocalizes, and the way every prey animal within earshot freezes into that silence like the air itself has stiffened. It is a landscape that operates on fear after dark, and the animals that survive in it long-term are the ones who have learned to read its signals with the precision of fluency rather than the bluntness of alarm. Herd 7 did not spread out to graze. This is the detail that sits in the research notes with a quiet weight that is hard to convey without having seen what normal nighttime buffalo behavior looks like. A herd of 80 buffalo in a grassland with adequate security conditions will spread across a grazing area of several hundred meters after dark. Animals feed, the formation loosens, the social structure relaxes into something more like a neighborhood than an army. On the night of Day 2, the herd maintained a clustering radius of less than 60 meters throughout the night. The older bulls rotated through the outer perimeter positions in a pattern that researchers documented as systematic, not random movement, but a sequence that kept fresh animals on the outer edge at regular intervals. The matriarch did not sleep in the way her GPS data showed her sleeping on normal nights. Her position shifted multiple times between midnight and 3 a.m., always moving toward the outer ring, always moving toward the southwest, toward where the Ntsevu Pride's collars placed them. She knew where they were. She spent the night facing that direction. In the distance, on the Ntsevu's collar data, 14 lions were resting in the darkness 800 meters away. 2 of them, the coalition males, showed the kind of restless position shifting that researchers associate with hunger-driven alertness rather than post-feed rest. They hadn't eaten properly in nearly 2 days. They would hunt in the morning. They had been hunting herd 7 for 6 years. They had run this corridor, managed this prey population, adapted their geometry and their timing in response to every behavioral shift the herd had ever shown them. They were apex predators at the height of their physical capability, operating in territory they knew completely. They did not know what the herd had spent the last 18 hours becoming. Day 3 was 4 hours away. Before it arrives, one more piece of the story deserves its place here. The 2 Ntsevu coalition males had been together since birth. Littermates, or near littermates, which gave them the kind of coordinated trust that even experienced lion coalitions rarely achieve. The scarred male, the one with the shoulder wound documented since 2018, was the larger of the 2, estimated at 195 kilograms in the last researcher weight assessment. His coalition partner carried a slight asymmetry in his left hind leg from an old buffalo injury, a detail that the research notes flagged as significant context for what was coming. He had been hurt by buffalo before. He had survived it, recovered, and continued hunting this herd for 4 years since. He was not naive about what buffalo could do. He had the physical evidence of it built permanently into his gait. And on the morning of day 3, he would walk toward them anyway, because that is what apex predators do. They push. They test, they rely on the accumulated evidence of 6 years of successful predation against this specific herd. They rely on everything that has always worked. The buffalo were counting on exactly that. The herd was already moving when the sky was still black, not the slow, grazing drift of buffalo in the early hours before light. This was the whole herd moving together in the same direction at the same pace, with the matriarch at the forward edge and the older bulls arranged around the outer margin like the walls of something being deliberately assembled. At 4:51 a.m., herd 7 was moving southwest. The Ntsevu Pride's GPS collars placed all 14 lions 640 meters in that direction, still in their overnight resting cluster. The distance was closing at a walking pace, not a charge, not a stampede, but a deliberate, unhurried advance that covered ground the way something covers ground when it has decided where it's going and has no intention of being redirected. By 5:08 a.m., the distance was 380 meters. The first lion to detect the approaching herd was a subadult female on the eastern edge of the pride's resting cluster. Her head came up sharply at 5:09, and within 30 seconds the entire pride was on its feet. The coalition males moved instinctively to the front, the position they had occupied at the beginning of every confrontation for 6 years, the position from which their size and combined presence had always held the geometry of dominance that 14 lions over a scattered prey herd represented. What they saw coming through the pre-dawn darkness was not a scattered prey herd. The alliance formation has a specific architecture. Understanding it requires setting aside the mental image of a buffalo herd as a reactive mass of animals. The alliance is not a mass. It is a structure. The outer ring is bulls, the largest, oldest, heaviest males, positioned with their heads outward and horns angled toward the threat. The spacing between them is not random, close enough that no gap can be exploited by a lion making a separation run, but wide enough that each bull has full freedom to charge or drive a horn strike without colliding with the animal beside him. Researchers measuring the day 3 footage, frame by frame, calculated the average interbull spacing at 2.3 meters, narrow enough to be a wall, wide enough to be a weapon. Inside that outer ring, the cows and calves moved in a compressed central cluster. Not panicked compression, organized compression. The calves were interior. The cows faced inward toward the calves rather than outward toward the threat. Their role was not to fight. It was to hold the center so the outer ring could hold the perimeter. The matriarch occupied the forward apex, the point of the formation closest to the lions. In defensive buffalo formations, the matriarch is typically positioned centrally, protected by the bulls around her. In the alliance formation, she is at the front. Researchers believe this is functional rather than symbolic. The bulls in the outer ring orient their spacing and movement relative to her position. She is the anchor of the geometry. The formation stays coherent because it stays oriented to her. At 5:14 a.m., the Ntsevu Pride saw this formation advancing toward them, and the collar data recorded something researchers found significant. None of the 14 lions moved forward. They held position. They did not initiate. For the first time in 6 years, the Ntsevu waited to see what Herd 7 would do next. The formation stopped at 90 meters. 22 minutes of charged electric stillness followed, the kind of silence the Serengeti produces occasionally, so loaded with tension that research camera operators described it afterward as feeling like pressure, like the air between the two groups had physical weight. The coalition males paced, the tight, repetitive movement of animals recalculating rather than deciding. The scarred male moved left twice, then right, testing angles the way the Ntsevu always tested angles before committing. Each time he moved, the nearest bulls in Herd 7's outer ring shifted to face him. Not the whole formation, just the nearest bulls, pivoting smoothly to keep their horns oriented toward the point of potential entry. The formation was tracking him in real time. At 5:36 a.m., two younger Ntsevu females attempted the flanking arc that had worked on day one, a wide, fast sweep around the herd's right side, designed to find the loose edge where a separation could be created. They ran hard, covered 70 meters in seconds, and found the right side of the formation already rotating to meet them. 4 bulls swung outward in a coordinated pivot that closed the angle before the females arrived. The females pulled up short. They had run directly into a wall of horns that hadn't been there when they started the arc. One got too close. The nearest outer bull drove forward in a single explosive movement. Not a chase, but a short, devastating charge that caught the female across the left shoulder with enough force to lift her briefly off the ground. She hit the dust, scrambled upright, and retreated at a full run. The bull returned to the formation's outer ring with the same deliberate pace he'd left it with. The gap he'd created closed behind him as the adjacent bulls tightened their spacing. 11 seconds. The female limped for the rest of the filmed footage. The Ntsevu coalition males charged at 5:41 a.m. 2 lions at the height of their physical capability, together nearly 400 kilograms, running at full speed directly at the formation. In 6 years of hunting Herd 7, a charge from the coalition males had never failed to produce a scatter response. The sound alone, that full-throated, ground-vibrating roar produced mid-charge, had broken buffalo formations before contact was even made. The alliance formation contracted, not backward, inward. The outer ring tightened its spacing and held ground. The inner cluster compressed further. The matriarch at the forward apex planted herself, lowered her head, and the coalition males ran directly into a wall of locked horns and 800-kilogram bodies that did not move. The scarred male hit the formation at its left edge and took a horn strike across the right flank that opened a wound researchers later estimated at 15 centimeters. He twisted away. His coalition partner pulled up 2 meters short, pivoting hard to find an angle, and every direction he moved, the formation had already closed it. At 5:43 a.m., the scarred male retreated. His partner held position for 9 seconds, alone, in front of a formation that was now beginning to advance, and then turned and followed. The Ntsevu Pride withdrew at a run. Collar data recorded 47 kilometers per hour, sustained for 800 meters before dropping to a trot. This was not tactical repositioning. This was the fastest movement any of the 14 lions had produced across the entire three-day confrontation, and it was moving directly away from herd 7. The formation followed for 400 meters. Then the matriarch stopped. The outer ring held. The advance ceased. The Ntsevu Pride did not return. There is a detail in the Day 3 footage that almost gets lost in the intensity of what surrounds it. In the final seconds before the formation halted its advance, at the moment the matriarch stopped and 400 meters of Kruger grassland opened between herd 7 and the retreating Pride, the research camera caught a clear shot of the formation's front left position. The bull holding that position was heavy-bossed, moving with the slight stiffness in his right foreleg, documented in field notes since 2021. The same bull who had stood still for 41 seconds on day 1, 200 meters from a fresh kill site, watching the lions feed while every other buffalo ran. The one whose pause had earned a single researcher's note: observe. He was at the front of the alliance formation, not by coincidence. The geometry placed the largest, most experienced bulls at the points of highest contact probability, and he was among the oldest animals in the herd. But the footage holds something that resists purely mechanical explanation. This was the animal who had stopped when all others scattered, who had stood in open ground and looked at the lions long after looking was safe. On day 3, he was the first bull the coalition males would have reached. He didn't move. What the alliance demonstrates, what those 3 days in Kruger actually prove, is not simply that buffalo can fight back. It is that the predator-prey relationship in large social mammals is not a fixed asymmetry. It is a dynamic equilibrium, and under the right conditions of sustained pressure, accumulated memory, and social organization, that equilibrium can shift. The alliance works because lion hunting strategy depends on 3 things: separation, panic, and pursuit. The formation removes all 3 simultaneously. It cannot be separated because its spacing closes every gap. It cannot be panicked because the coordination structure holds even under direct charge. And the lions cannot pursue because there is no isolated individual, only a wall of horns that advances when they retreat and holds when they hold. 14 lions against the alliance are not 14 against 60. They are 14 against a single organism that weighs 48,000 kilograms and does not break. This is why the footage became required university viewing, not because of the drama, though it earns that description, but because of what it documents. A sequenced, coordinated response by prey animals who maintained detailed memory of a specific threat, communicated across the herd through mechanisms still being decoded, and organized themselves into a structure that neutralized every advantage the threat possessed. That is not instinct operating on a general template. That is something closer to strategy. There are approximately 900,000 Cape buffalo remaining across sub-Saharan Africa. The number sounds large until you map it against shrinking territory. Kruger's buffalo population has declined 30% since the 1990s. Drought cycles, disease pressure, and the slow compression of habitat that forces animals into smaller, drier, more contested ranges. The same drought tightening the Ntsevu's hunting corridor on day 1 of this confrontation is part of a documented pattern of increasing aridity that climate projections show intensifying through the coming decades. The loss of either species from this system would not simply reduce a population count. It would unravel relationships built over thousands of years. The Ntsevu's 6 years of predation pressure on herd 7 is not a tragedy for the buffalo. It is the force that produced the alliance. It is the selection pressure that has been sharpening buffalo cognition and social organization for millennia. Remove the lions, and you remove what made buffalo into what they are. Remove the buffalo, and you remove the prey foundation that keeps a pride like the Ntsevu hunting at the level of sophistication that Day 3 reveals. These are not separate stories. They are one story told from two perspectives. Protecting it means protecting the land it happens on. By mid-afternoon, Herd 7 was grazing. The formation had dissolved back into the loose, wide spread of normal feeding behavior. Animals drifting across the grassland, calves close to their mothers, older bulls on the periphery with their heads down. If you arrived now without knowing what had happened before dawn, you would see nothing unusual. Just a herd of buffalo moving through the amber afternoon light of Kruger, doing what buffalo do. But on the collar data, 1.4 kilometers to the southwest, the Ntsevu Pride was still moving away. They would hunt again. Tomorrow or the day after. The hunger was too constant and the territory too shared for one morning to end a 6-year relationship. The Ntsevu would adapt, as they always had. But the adaptation would begin from a different baseline. The buffalo had moved the line. The old bull was grazing at the eastern edge of the herd as the sun went down. He lifted his head once, briefly, in the direction the lions had gone, tested the air, then lowered his head and went back to the grass. The herd had remembered, the herd had organized, the herd had held. That is what it looks like when prey stops running and starts thinking. And somewhere in the research record, in the careful, precise language of a University of Pretoria behavioral study, the moment is documented in terms that try very hard not to say more than the data supports. It does not quite succeed in hiding its astonishment.